All right. For Nathan, who is joining us on Zoom, what you're looking at is a draft land use goals and objectives document that we'll kind of walk through today. Um, and so for the past few meetings, we've been talking a lot about maps and applying the new designations to specific areas in the city. I have my map here if we want to talk about that a little bit more today. But the second component of the land use chapter is goals and objectives and strategies as well. So the document that you see in front of you has goals listed and strategies numbered. Or I'm sorry, goals listed, objectives numbered, and then the strategies to fulfill those objectives are bullet pointed. So you see among these goals, there's 3 pages, front, back, and then a third page. Basically, try to summarize what this group has been talking about over the last couple of months here. And on the front page there, really what we're taking a look at, expanded opportunities for redevelopment and new development, as well as flexible land use designations and zoning districts, 2 of the main things that we've been talking about. So I guess I would just ask, I know, Nathan, you're just seeing this for the first time right now, but we followed kind of a similar um, format in all of our committee meetings, just asking for your initial reactions and seeing if there's anything that you'd like to add or change, especially related to the first 2, expanded opportunities for redevelopment, new development, as well as flexible land use designations and zoning districts. And you'll see under the first goal, both looking at facilitating development within existing area of the city, but if we're taking a look at new residential subdivisions where lots don't exist, that's where we talk a little bit about taking a closer look at the bluffland regulations, especially south of the Mississippi River Valley corridor. And then in terms of flexible land use designations and zoning districts, hoping to reduce the number of variances needed for new development. And that really gets into our lot size requirements in the city. And then add additional uses to zoning districts. And we talked about this a little bit with our land use designation discussions, but adding residential as a permitted use in the I-1 zoning district, more residential options in the commercial zoning districts, which would be that commercial mixed use land use designation. And then owner occupied duplexes or with permitting owner occupied duplexes within existing structures or with small additions in the residential suburban land use designation. So that's the designation that is south of Highway 61. And so in some of the more suburban areas of the city, allowing duplexes, but they have to be owner occupied. And so I just look for your general comments on that first page there. Basically apply for programs or funding to help to take out contaminated soil.
When people are applying for redevelopment right now, there's 2 steps. They have to change the comp plan and then the zoning. Is there any way to streamline that so that if something's not conforming, that it's just more of a 1-step process?
That's exactly what we're looking to do with our updated comp plan to make it more streamlined.
You just mentioned owner occupied duplexes south of highway. Why owner occupied only?
Taking a look at that as a way to introduce gradual change to those neighborhoods. That's what's proposed. It could be straight duplexes, but for in particular that area of the city that is so predominantly single family, what I thought was probably most appropriate was to introduce change, but a limited amount of it. So that's where the owner occupied provision comes in.
As a developer, you need to look and see what the city needs. And if you need 2-unit buildings or 3-unit buildings, and you're going to develop land, it's expensive to do, you should have the option to do whatever you think is necessary in order to facilitate development.
I would echo some of what John is saying. I don't come from the development background that John does, but I think about the enforcement of it. Yes, when that original duplex was built, okay, so the owner built a home and then built built a duplex on it. Okay, so 20, 30, 40 years later it's sold and the market's changed. Oh man, I don't want to be involved in the enforcement of that deal. I I don't know, something sticks in my mind that's not that I'm not sure that's the direction to go, to somehow require this and police this, that this has to be owner occupied.
I believe new units would not have to be owner occupied, right? We're only talking about converting existing.
That would be the intent, yes. So existing units in existing neighborhoods. So any new subdivision after the adoption of the zoning standards in the Unified Development Code. So any new subdivision after that, we'd want that mix of different uses. So whether it's owner occupied, non-owner occupied, duplexes or triplexes.
So if I built a townhouse with 2 units and I own both sides of it, that'd be owner occupied, but then I could sell mine and it'd be back to a townhouse.
Exactly. Yep. But what Nathan was getting at is this is really targeted towards existing subdivisions.
And that's great. I love, but what you said was new development south of 61. I have no problem with the core area of Winona doing that. We want to do lot sizes and we want to do a lot of other things. But to tell somebody you can't build a duplex because you're south of Highway 61, but you can build it, but it has to be owner occupied, I think that's rather restrictive.
I feel like we'd be opening a can of worms. If you think of, I'm just picturing my neighborhood. If somebody figured out it was profitable to convert all these single family homes into duplexes and then rent them out, the existing neighborhood would change quickly and we would be dealing with a lot of upset people.
I hear that. I find it unlikely that would happen quickly. I don't know. I think we're close on this, but I'm still struggling with requiring this to be owner occupied duplex. South of 61. Yes, I did.
No, not south of 60.
Isn't that what you said?
That's what we'd be looking at for this one. Yep.
Would have to be owner occupied.
So if you're converting a single family home to a duplex south of 61, what is proposed is that it would have to be owner occupied. And so the way that we could enforce that or regulate that is require somebody to come in and get a conditional use permit in order to do that. So there would be a conditional use permit that's attached to the property that is transferable if the property were to sell or change hands when the property sells and changes hands.
So that goes back to, okay, I do this. I have a single family home.
Yep.
I build on a duplex.
Yep.
15 years later, I want to sell it. I have to sell it to somebody who's going to live in one half of that duplex.
That's what this would do.
Then I think that restriction is too restrictive.
Got it.
You want housing? You want homes? I think it happens slower with that kind of restriction. My position.
I understand both sides. I don't think going slow is not bad, but there are houses already that people, look at and say, hey, can I buy that and rent it out and make some money? Now, if they can throw another unit in the basement and double their rent or, increase it by 50% by getting an extra group in there, I mean, that makes a big difference. And you will see a lot of people doing that. And I don't think, I agree with Carlos that, and because I also do this for a living and I know people that own their homes, take way better care of them than renters. And that's just a fact. We had to, I think I told the story before, but we had to buy the house across from my mom's. That was a duplex college rental. We tried renting it out to responsible people. We tried renting it out to families, and it's like we just had to give up, throw our hands in the air, and sell it as a single family, so that we could get someone that would actually live there and take care of the property.
I'm just stating that I'm with Nathan on it. I feel like you're gonna disrupt some of these subdivisions that it just changes the character of it. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
Well, you disrupted all downtown. I mean, disruption is what's happened. I mean, we have duplexes downtown next to single family. It's not the end of the world. I mean, people can make the decision where they want to move.
True.
Well,
True. The biggest thing is, like Nathan said too, is as a rental, you don't take care of it as well as you do if you're living there as a family. And some of these neighborhoods, they're high-end neighborhoods, and you'd hate to see, that possible disruption.
well, and you say it's not the end of the world, but it was the end of the world because we created a whole law, the 30% rule, to prevent it.
But there were already duplexes there. I mean, this is kind of not my backyard type situation. What's wrong with somebody? People complain about special need housing in neighborhoods. We're always complaining about something about, well, I don't want those kind of people in my neighborhood. Well, we got to put those people someplace.
Let me see if I can doodle on this one a little bit and bring it back at the next meeting. Like you said, I think we're getting close on this, wanting to introduce change, but is there a way we can find a good consensus or a good middle ground? So I'll take a closer look at that over the next couple of weeks here. Any other comments or questions on the first two goals and the strategies and objectives underneath? One thing I will do is flip to the top of the second page. And
Just real quickly, the questions on the brownfield, I think that was raised.
Yep.
We have vacant lots that are brownfield.
definitely,
potential,
yep.
And those are,
A lot of former industrial uses where things are just plowed into the ground 100 years ago, and they're contaminated as a result. Yep.
So you're going to skip the flexible land use designations and zoning district?
No, not going to skip that one. I'm just going to go, since we were talking about the first page, another strategy that's included under number 2 there, and Luke has just scrolled down to it, is a bullet point that talks about adding additional apartment buildings without a required non-residential use on the first floor in the mixed-use downtown core outside of the central retail commercial area of downtown. So that's kind of in the loop surrounding downtown. Think 4th Street, 5th Street, Huff on the west, and then east of Franklin, or maybe just west of Franklin. That area surrounding just the immediate core of downtown, allowing straight apartment buildings. Right now, you have to have non-residential or commercial on at least 50% of the first floor. So this would loosen it up and allow straight apartment buildings in that area.
And what was the original reason for requiring commercial on the first floor?
To make sure that in our core areas that residential buildings don't convert commercial space in our historically commercial and retail areas. But what we're finding is that those areas are still maintaining themselves. They're okay essentially, and that would stay the same. But what we're seeing is in areas just outside of that core area for retail and commercial, people wanting to do straight apartment buildings, but kind of getting hung up on this first floor commercial. Plus, it doesn't appear that the market is necessarily needing that first floor commercial.
That's the key. I mean, there are vacant properties downtown already. And, if we could utilize those, particularly not in the downtown core, but I can give you an example. It was a lady that was on Franklin. So she had a business in the front with it, and then they moved out. And it's like, for a long time it was vacant. She's going, can I change it into a rental? And we granted her the variance, and you don't know. You know, you look at all the new apartment buildings that are being built, you have to provide parking. That parking needs to be underneath the building, but if half of it has to feed commercial, then you can't build the building because you can't have enough parking underneath the building. So changing that, good.
But then the downtown would still require the first floor commercial, is that?
The
my-
core area of the
core
downtown.
area,
So
okay.
think Second Street, Third Street, Main Center, that core area.
I'm sorry,
Right.
what specific areas is this referring to?
This would refer to areas just outside of Second Street and Third Street, outside of the core commercial and retail areas of downtown, but still in the general downtown area. So think 4th Street, 5th Street, Huff Street, just west of Franklin. So still in kind of the area we would consider downtown, but not in the core retail area at the center of downtown.
So west of Franklin or east of Franklin or both?
Both, because the mixed use downtown core, I think, does extend in one area just east of Franklin. So I don't know, Luke, if you could potentially pull up the beacon real quick, I think that'd be very helpful here.
Yeah, I think we almost got to go block by block on this because I don't think it's fair to have, people that have invested in their business and they've got a storefront, and then next door in the vacant storefront next door, a family moves in, and you got a guy that's sitting on his couch in his underpants as you got customers trying to come through, and they're looking in the storefront, and you got all these people decorating their storefronts, and then you got someone making breakfast.
That could be an attraction, though. Come down and see the guy that cooks breakfast now. Yeah. So with this, what we would do, since it's just a goal and objective, or since it's just a strategy, the strategy would exist in the comp plan, but it wouldn't change anything until we drill down and actually change the zoning. So in that case, we will go block by block and determine where this would be enacted and where it would not. But just taking from the comp plan's perspective, a 30,000 foot view, the idea is that it's just allowing that concept to be formalized, and then in the future we'll sharpen our pencils and go block by block. But essentially, what the area that I'm talking about is, so the core area of downtown, core commercial area, you think 3rd Street here, from Johnson all the way to Franklin here. And let me see here. Oh, Luke, will you just scroll down to see where Franklin ends? Yep, right there. So you can see just east of Franklin. So the mixed use downtown core is the darker teal. It's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but you can see it when you take a look at it compared to the downtown fringe, which is in the lighter teal. So you see the darker teal areas on 2nd Street and 3rd Street, Main and Center, really that core area, that's where the commercial requirement would still stay. But then if you go south of 4th Street, think about Main Square, kind of the City Hall area that we're in right now, as well as just to the southwest of there, where you're looking at the Masterpiece Hall, and then future redevelopment related to that, where you could, if you wanted to, just have a straight apartment building. You wouldn't be required to have that first floor commercial. And the same thing would exist to the west, surrounding Huff Street and the bridge, kind of in these areas that we still think are downtown, but aren't necessarily in that commercial core.
I just want us to be careful with this one because I know that, when they tore down Charlie's and built those row houses, everyone sort of agrees that that was probably not a great use for that site.
Definitely. So we will take this block by block when it comes to sharpening of pencils. Thanks, Nathan. All right. The next section, in terms of the draft that I have, is efficient use of land adjacent to existing city utilities. And this really gets to taking a look at what resources we have in the core whenever we are looking at physical expansion. And a lot of this is already in our 2007 comprehensive plan, particularly related to before you're extending utilities outside of city boundaries, you want to take a look at the cost of extension and long-term maintenance, the impacts to the level of service for police and fire and emergency response services, and then the impact of new development on traffic circulation and safety of the transportation system. So that's already in our 2007 comprehensive plan, and it's just basically bringing that into the next plan as well, which is consistent with how we've talked about things. But then extending utilities outside of city boundaries following study of the proposed land for future development. So, I think that a lot of times, when you're looking at greenfield development, you assume that, it's prime for development, there's no issues. Well, there's a lot going on in areas that are used for farming right now, prime agricultural soils, maybe depth to bedrock issues. So it's important for us, if we're looking at spending the money to extend utilities, all this is saying is that the land that we're looking at extending those utilities to, let's take a good look at what the limitations of that land would be in addition to the opportunities that would be afforded. Definitely something that a developer or somebody who is going to be developing land already does, but just something for people who are at the city at that time to think about as well, and to make sure is part of the public discussion. Any comments on this section or questions?
So where is there undeveloped land adjacent to existing utilities?
So adjacent to our existing utilities on County Road 44, or as you go up Garvin Heights Road, that's one instance. There are also utilities in the ground on Highway 14. And then if you go just west into Old Goodview Road, there's developable land in and around that area that is within the city, but is not served by city utilities right now. So. And County Road 17 as well. Yep. Okay, we'll just move to the next one. This is we talked a little bit about this before, but maintaining neighborhood character while allowing for change. And this gets to that discussion that I think, Brian, that we had talked a lot about, is providing those gradual transitions between different land use designations. So this is where, once we get into amending the code, we will sharpen our pencils, go block by block, and really take a look at the details to provide a gradual transition and intensity of uses. So you don't want something that's really, really busy next to something that's really, really quiet. We want this gradual stepping up and stepping down as much as we can, do it. It's not going to be perfect, of course, but to help facilitate that, I think, is appropriate. And then in addition to that, provide by right options for investment permitted with standards. So one thing that we need to do is, when we're looking at these changes, be really careful in what we require the approvals process to be. So things that are permitted with standards or just straight permitted, you can do that by right. You can just do it as long as you comply with the regulations. Versus a conditional use permit or an interim use permit, these are additional processes that you would go through. And a lot of times a CUP or an IUP is appropriate for a use that might, have some things that the neighborhood might object about. So say you were going to put a new bar into a traditionally neighborhood area. Well, yes, we want a new bar in a neighborhood area because we have a tradition of neighborhood bars all around. But if we're going to do that, it should probably be a conditional use permit, so that we can make sure that we put a condition on there that they have to close by a certain period of time if they're going to be surrounded by a bunch of residential houses, that type of thing. So that's what this goal and strategy and objective gets at. The next is resilient neighborhoods, and this goes across 2 pages. The first talks about small scale commercial uses in the core area of Winona. So ones that already exist, re-legalizing those existing neighborhood commercial uses, and I just put some examples there. And then when you get to the next page, place reasonable regulations on new neighborhood commercial to ensure compatibility with adjacent residential homes. And that's what I should have on there, on new neighborhood commercial.
Just so I make sure I understand, so we have a former grocery store that went out of business 60 years ago.
Yep.
It's been residential ever since, and now it's going to be a coffee shop, and we would as long as they're obeying other rules, that would be allowed, for example.
Correct. Yep.
Would they have any additional hoops to jump through?
They may, depending on the use.
Okay.
And so that's where in the zoning code, we go use by use. And if there are uses that tend to be open later, like a bar, maybe that's a conditional use permit. But if you're going to do a coffee shop type of thing where they're, not open too late or something like that, maybe that's permitted with standards. Basically, any type of use that may have some issues when it's instituted, off-site issues, that's something where we want to be a little bit more careful in the approval process to help ensure compatibility with the adjacent neighbors.
Would there be any objection to a house, a dwelling that's never been commercial, either converted, of course, obeying applicable codes and rules and entrance, okay, into a coffee shop or acceptable use, or that the house demolished and a brand new acceptable use coffee shop type thing being built? Does this rule change address those two situations?
Yes, it would. And when we get into the code is where we can take a look at where that may be more appropriate. You may not want a house to be demolished in the middle of a block and a coffee shop to go in. So for instance, one of the standards could be it has to be on a corner lot type of thing.
I was just gonna say, are there gonna be a list? I mean, how do we judge what is, we need to have a list before, so people can say, hey, I can do something here or I can't do it. There'll actually be a list of appropriate uses and stuff, or?
Not as part of the comp plan. So what we would do, I mean, what we could do is provide examples, but things wouldn't be codified until the zoning code is actually amended. A big thing that we'll have to do with this is really when the land use, especially the land use goals and objectives and the land use section is put out there, just re-emphasize that these are just overall concepts, directions that we're looking at going, that this does not mean tomorrow things are going to change. This means that in the future, we will look to change the code in order to do these things. And when we do that, we'll go through a thorough review process with the Planning Commission, City Council, public hearings, and everything that's normally involved when we update our city code. So there'd be a lot more detail work and public input related to anything that is listed here. The next is permitting small scale commercial in appropriate residential, suburban residential areas of Winona. So this would be, can we have a corner store south of Highway 61 in a suburban area so that people don't necessarily have to drive down, even though we love people to drive down to the core area of the city to get stuff. But could there be a corner store on a state highway in an area that already sees a lot of traffic that that essentially meets the needs of the neighborhood? So that, again, this is something where, you'd have to go and take a look at what is the appropriate locations for this. We're not talking about in the middle of Valley Oaks having a commercial store. Maybe that's something that we want to talk about in the future, but this is something that, perhaps, at the entrance to Valley Oaks or at the entrance to a subdivision or along a county road, it would make sense to, in close proximity to some of our subdivisions, allow for small scale commercial.
That makes sense. I see a lot of that in suburbs of Des Moines, Waukee especially, where there'll be like a convenience store that's on the corner of an entrance to a much larger subdivision. And So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
All right, and the next one, permitted diversity of housing types. And this is where we're really like looking to expand housing choice in the city and to allow for really relegalization of a lot of what already happens in the core area of Winona, but also introducing the potential for owner-occupied triplexes. And so there's that owner-occupied provision again. But this would really pertain to the core area of Winona, so it's north of Highway 61. If you were to do a triplex on a standard lot, it would have to be owner-occupied just because of the potential for income generation. What we'd be looking to do is create a situation where somebody could go into a house, create a triplex, and allow them to afford that house and live there. What we don't necessarily want to do, or what this is shying away from, is somebody buying a single family home in the core of Winona, turning it into a triplex and not living there. So what we're trying to do is expand housing choice for people who want to live in the core area of Winona.
I get that, but I just keep running different scenarios through my head, like the scenario where I live in and stuff. So if I were to convert my house from a single family into a duplex, and at some point I decided to move out of my house and move somewhere else in the city, but I want to keep my existing property, I can't do that, is what you're telling me.
That's correct.
Uh, I disagree. I just think that's too restrictive in some cases.
I echo, I see both sides of this. I'm probably gonna come down to the last side, right, what you just said. My son is 24 years old. He's all excited. He's living in Minneapolis, all excited to try to figure out property. And he wants to invest in property. And then, so he wants to buy a duplex. He wants to live in half. And then he wants to buy his own house. And of course, keep the duplex. That's how that's how this works. And it takes, yeah. Okay. You guys all understand. I don't need to go any further with my explanation.
I will say this, that forgetting that part of the equation, it's vitally important that we do change the lot requirements. Because right now we're looking at 7,000 square feet. And the way most triplexes are right now, under the present, you have to have 2,500 square feet per unit. Okay, so there's always a process where they have to come before and get a variance. And there's already numerous properties with threeplexes on that don't meet it. So I would love to see that part of it change for sure, that in fact you can have a triplex without having to get a variance for the 7,000 square feet.
But then it also comes down to parking too, because, you know, there's, okay, you have to meet the, yep.
Exactly. Yep. And so the second portion of that is, so if we allow triplexes, what we do is we'd want some limited exterior design standards. So we'd want to make sure that there's doors facing the street. You'd be amazed how sometimes a new unit is put in and there's not a door facing the street. There needs to be some type of interaction with the street. So something similar, something really basic like that, a limited number of windows, something like that. In addition to parking standards, so meeting our parking code that we have.
Is that only for triplexes? Does that include larger facilities?
That already includes larger facilities.
You have to have doors that open towards the street.
Yes, our existing code right now for anything in a multifamily residential district, if you do anything 5+ units, our design standards apply. The second bullet point goes down to, so the typical city size lot is 50 by 140. So what we would allow is up to a duplex on lots smaller than 50 by 140, with the limited exterior design standards and parking again. So if you take a look at the core area of Winona, you see that on a lot of standard city lots over the years, they've been split into two. So essentially you have two separate dwelling units on that 50 by 140 lot. Think of some of the smaller lots right adjacent to an alley, and then you have the house on the corner. So what that would essentially what that already is it's already a duplex. It's just not within the same structure. So what this would allow is in those areas on a 50 by 140 lot, you could make it a duplex within the same structure. So it follows essentially what already exists in the city, but allows it all to happen within one structure. And what that does is it reduces the lot size and frontage and the requirements to have a duplex so that you provide more ability for people to turn existing single family homes into duplexes. And there would not be an owner occupancy regulation related to duplex. We were just looking at triplexes because of the potential for income generation with those 3 units.
So your next bullet point is permit a variety of housing types in new subdivisions, but earlier, this is 100% reverse of what you said earlier.
That was related to existing subdivisions. This would be for new subdivisions. So essentially any new subdivision after adoption of the ordinance changes. The idea is for existing, so think of Valley Oaks, think of, the Crestview area, think of, Knott Valley. In those areas, if you're going to change an existing home to a duplex, that has impact because people are used to, what they've seen in their residential area for a long time. But with a new subdivision, nobody lives there yet, we can be a little bit more flexible.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because my stance changes quite a bit from what I said earlier based upon new subdivisions.
The last bullet point is relaxing standards for lot dimension and lot siting standards when adjoining different zoning districts. So essentially this gets to what we talked about on the previous page, but providing those gradual transitions where you have 2 different zoning districts. We want to make sure that we have a transition between those 2 different areas. And a lot of times what that might mean is some slightly different standards that apply to those lots that are that transition between one district and another. And my mic wasn't on there. Sorry, Nathan. So the last bullet point there, relaxing standards next to least restrictive lot, it basically gets to that gradual change in intensity between different land uses. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the last section. And so up till this point, we've talked a lot about housing, development, that type of stuff. We also want to focus on our natural resource and recreation areas. Part of the reason why so many people love living in Winona is because you have access to natural resource and recreation areas really close to you. It takes you 5 minutes to go up to the bluffs type of thing. So these objectives relate to the work that other subcommittees are doing, but basically it gets to retaining natural state areas and natural resource areas that we have, and then also retaining the recreation areas that we have, but also enhancing them as well where we can. So facilitating access to existing recreation and natural resource areas. We have a lot of access and connection language in the various plans that you see listed. An example is the Bluffs Traverse plan that we have that basically links everywhere from Sugarloaf to St. Mary's. Taking a look at balancing the distribution of recreational resources. So we want to make sure that recreational amenities aren't necessarily concentrated in one specific area. There's been a lot of discussion about the need for park areas in the west side of Winona. For instance, around like Madison School, where the city has that portion of land that used to be the playground, making sure that in the future we improve that and balance the resources for recreation as well as we can, considering our budget parameters and our ability to maintain things as well. So making sure that we have that in the comp plan, I think, is something that's important. And then I also have in here, consider changes to existing recreation and natural areas to allow better management of the overall system. So what this gets at is we have a lot of recreation areas. We have a lot of natural resource areas. Invest in and manage what people love the most. And then if there's areas where, for instance, we don't need to mow that whole area, we don't do that. So that we can better utilize our city resources that we have at our disposal in order to maintain what people love. Part of that too is partnering with other organizations. So for instance, mountain bikers take care of a lot of our paths are up in the bluffs that mountain bikers use, but also people like to walk and hike in those areas as well. And then enacting the strategies in the natural resources and sustainability plan. That's something that hasn't been approved yet, but basically what that does is it speaks to better management of the natural resources that we have and how to improve that. Not to say that it's bad or that it's lacking right now, but there's always ways that it can be improved upon. And then adding new uses to existing natural resources and recreational areas. So this really gets to the plans that I touched on previously and how can we do that. And then encouraging conservation design of new subdivisions. So encouraging cluster development to preserve important natural resources and unique characteristics of the land. This is something that's already in our code or in our comp plan, and I think it'd be good to bring to the new comp plan as well.
I have a lot to say on this. I didn't realize this would be part of our plan, but it makes sense. I've been saying this for a while, and here we are. We have some major trails, bicycle trails that are coming into our bluffs, and I'm excited about it. It's cool. It's wonderful. It's a large investment from the state of Minnesota, totaling about $2 million. City council just entered into an agreement with Winona Area Mountain Bike Group to maintain those trails. And okay, so we think, oh, they're going to maintain them. They have leaf blowers, rakes, and I'm not even sure they have gas powered chainsaws. I think it's hands. They're picking up sticks. Okay, what happens if we have 10 inches of rain? I'm concerned about and that's just that trail system. I'm concerned about our long-term maintenance obligations in Park Rec. We keep building more stuff, and it's wonderful. I'm a Park Rec guy. I'll use the bike trails. These are cool. This is part of what makes Winona, but I'm concerned, and maybe I'm out of order here talking. Maybe I'm getting too granular on this. But man, I am concerned. I raised it at the last city council meeting. I'm raising it now. I'm trying to raise awareness. So I'm gonna address one more issue here. Appropriate use for recreation. There are different users who have different expectations for what they're going to see and experience. There was a proposal for bicycling near the former deer park down in Prairie Island. Okay, and then there was actually frisbee golf that was briefly brought in there, and then that wound up getting moved. That's a natural state area that there's some unique habitat. I'm kind of into that sort of stuff. I'm into birds, and it disturbs some of that stuff. We need to be careful about where we're situating and where we're encouraging recreation in certain areas. I could go on and on. I've said enough. And I'm going to end with the maintenance part. I'm really concerned about are we going to build ourselves into a cul-de-sac here in 10 and 20 years from now? And I could go on and on and on with our maintenance needs and Park Rec. So. Sorry to be a downer, but there we go.
No, and I actually, I echo that, and, you know, I share your concern because of, you know, how much we have. And, you know, everything that's out there. And that's what I tried to get at under number 3, and the first bullet point there is permit changes to landscapes which reduce regular city maintenance needs while retaining important characteristics of natural resources and recreational areas.
So you're talking about areas that are unused, that you're just gonna let grow over, not maintain. I mean, if it's next to a park or something like that, why not let it be redeveloped into something else?
That's a
Housing.
great, yep, and that's definitely another opportunity. Very delicate, though, to approach that. Yep.
Oh, I get that. I mean, if we can't maintain it, or it's too expensive to maintain.
Definitely. And in addition to this section here, in our land use descriptions for publicly available land, there is a provision in there saying that we should continually assess our recreational areas for how well they're meeting the needs of the population and make changes.
Yep, and then any
in accordance.
proceeds from the sale of that could go to fund park and rec.
So then who does that and how often is that done?
Park and Recreation Department.
So if they never decide to do it, then it never gets done.
Well, there's a lot of stuff in the plan here that if nobody decides to do it, then it never gets done. So, but one thing I will say though, is that by having it in the plan, that puts emphasis on it, and it puts it out there that this is something that we'd like to focus on. And does everything in a plan get done? No. But this last plan, 2007, I've said it a million times, we've 80% of the implementation actions that are recommended in that plan, we were able to complete.
Well, I mean, I think the park one, based upon the amount of money it can cost the city, is something that needs to be looked at. And not just if they decide they want to look at it, it should be in fact looked at on a yearly basis or bi-yearly. Something should be put in where mandatory that the Park and Rec Department look at this kind of land.
We can note that our Park and Recreation Subcommittee has yet to meet. But that could be something that's added to that section in terms of that type of review and specifying something like that, or at least recommending something like that. So.
And again, I'm a concrete thinker. You wouldn't have put this in if you didn't already have maybe an idea, like where are places that we can let go back to nature that, you know, I'm thinking of anything in the city and I'm not thinking of anything like that. So is it outside, at the core of the city? I guess I'm saying core city.
Just for instance, I think of areas in Lake Park that we mow right now that maybe aren't used, you know, or underutilized, that type of thing. Or are there areas of Lake Park that could be filled in and better utilized?
There's areas of Lake Park that just are underwater so much that, yeah.
That's
Maybe they
that's
should be
exactly what I
changed
was.
into ponds or something like that.
Exactly. Yep. And that's where too, that one provision that I have in there where you're continually taking a look at that, you know, is there an opportunity to do something like that? Definitely. But that's just one example, you know, do we have to mow everything, or can we let native plants, which, you know, absorb more or better, you know, they're pollinators, all that good stuff. Can we just let that happen? It's still managed to a certain extent because you're not just letting a bunch of weeds grow up in there, but you're also not taking the mower in there every week.
So then it is kind of a money thing.
Definitely. It's also a level of service and putting our resources into what people find most valuable.
I still miss Levy Park when we used to have the gardens down there. I thought that was beautiful. And we took them out and put concrete in the and I understand why we did that, but something like that would be nice with some pass through it and stuff. Low maintenance.
Any other comments or questions on this section here? Anything that's jumping out that is missing at all? And so maybe what we could do just a little bit here is talk about next steps. And so what I'd like to do and what we're looking to do with the other subcommittees is finish by the end of August. So one more meeting. And so what I'd like to do at the next meeting is if we can look out another 2 weeks here to August 25th at the same time. What I'd like to do is to get the information and the materials out to you so that you have some time to take a look at things before that meeting. But then at that meeting, we would take a final blush at things, and considering everything's still in a draft form and will be until the plan is adopted, basically approve that to go to the steering committee in September. And then we'd also be looking for a spokesperson from this committee that would come to a steering committee meeting and say, hey, this is kind of what we talked about, and this is what we're proposing, and give a good summary as to what we have been discussing. So that's kind of what we would look to do for the next meeting. And between now and then too, I'll take a look at some of the discussion we had related to owner occupied and see if there's a way we can work within that a little bit to meet more needs. So.
Carlos, let me go back to something you started the meeting with, and that is outside the downtown core, other uses than commercial in the front half of the building. Downtown core, depending upon what use you want to, I'm with Nathan, you don't want to have downtown core have residential in the front half of the property. I appreciate that.
Definitely.
But a good use might very well be parking for a building above that. Is that allowable the way you're stating it now? I mean, I look at some of the new buildings downtown. Is the new Fastenal building, is that front half of that building commercial? No, it's used as a business space.
Yeah, and when I say essentially the regulation right now is non-residential, so it can be anything. It could be parking. I'd have to double check on that. Obviously, what the main thing though that what we're trying to facilitate is interaction with the street and a lively streetscape. What we don't want are storefronts or areas that there's no interaction with the street. You have to go a block, for instance, without, seeing a storefront or being able to go into a business. We want to create that vibrancy in the core area of downtown and having non-residential uses on that first floor. And I would say even non-parking uses is important part of that. Can you have parking on the first floor in the rear? I think that's a more appropriate area, but
If you go down to La Crosse and look at some of the stuff they've done down there's parking underneath. And there's maybe some commercial, but there's mostly parking. And I'm not saying everywhere, but we have a lot of areas downtown, the Quality Die Cast. You've got a half a block there where nothing happens. And I'm not picking on them, they're already there. But I don't mean, I see the commercial area as being 3rd Street, where there's a lot of different businesses. But you get to 2nd Street and there you've got industry on 2nd Street. I look at places like the old warehouse liquor. Nothing's going to be done with that because you can't if you have to have 50% of that front commercial rather than a parking space, not going to get done.
well, I want to put Peter's Beer Garden East at that location. So
Okay, well, let's tear the building down to Peter's. Okay.
no, use the existing building, and then the parking area becomes turf and a nice area. So there we go. We'll have a great little stop between Market Street and Gabby's. But no, I understand what you're saying. So and that's a good point when it comes to flexibility related to parking.
Yes.
Because we know that people want it in the downtown area, but at the same time, we don't want to require too much of it. So, a lot of our discussions about parking are on how many per unit, not necessarily where it's located. So if we can take a look at that as well in terms of, can we have more parking on the first floor of buildings in areas where it's appropriate? That may help facilitate some additional development, as long as it's not required. So you're not requiring an artificial amount of parking so that you're not driving up the cost of housing units and driving up the cost of buildings, but it's up to the developer to a certain extent. We have some minimums, but Parking is something that we always have to continue to take a look at and balance, because sometimes you'll have too much, sometimes you'll have too little, but it's something to always take a look at. And really, we found throughout the US, and really in a lot of areas, even outside the US, is that the parking standards, they're best determined not by the city, but by the people who are proposing the specific land uses.
Well, I mean, I look at what could happen with the Main Square project now. I mean, we're gonna end up supposedly with 60 some apartment built, 60 apartments. You're gonna have to find parking for that someplace, and it's gonna have to be underneath the building, but underneath that building, if it's half of it's commercial, you're not gonna have enough parking.
Let me find a good place to put that in our goals and objectives statement. Any other discussion? Got 4 more minutes. Floor is open. Otherwise, we'll be looking out at another 2 weeks from now for our last meeting. Nathan, anything else you'd like to give to us today? Not today. Okay, great. Well, we'll plan on another 2 weeks here then, at 8:30 in the morning. Thank you so much again, everybody.
Did you ever send out an email, with the proposed?
An email with
With the new
changes?
Yeah,
No,
okay.
not yet, but I can do that, and I will do that.
I was looking at the email today, back and